The fluorescent lights of Memorial Children's Hospital cast harsh shadows across the polished linoleum floor, their steady hum a constant companion to the night shift staff. Nurse Sarah Mitchell moved quietly through the NICU, her rubber-soled shoes barely making a sound as she checked monitors and adjusted IVs with practiced precision. The room was a symphony of soft beeps and gentle whirs, each machine telling its own story of the tiny lives they helped sustain. Sarah paused at the incubator in the corner, her heart heavy as she gazed down at baby Ethan Collins. 6 days old and already fighting the battle of his life. Born 3 weeks premature during a complicated delivery, he hadn't taken a single breath on his own. His tiny chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, the ventilator doing the work his lungs couldn't manage. The monitors told a grim story, brain activity minimal, responses non-existent. The words persistent vegetative state had been whispered by attending physicians, though no one had the heart to say it directly to the parents. "Hang in there, little fighter," Sarah whispered, adjusting the blanket around his impossibly small form. His skin was nearly translucent, blue veins visible beneath the surface like delicate rivers. The doctors had given the Collins family little hope, preparing them for decisions no parent should ever have to make. Outside the window, thunder rumbled across the Minneapolis skyline, the first signs of the storm that had been threatening all evening. Sarah checked her watch, 2:17 a.m. The parents had finally been convinced to go home just after midnight, Mrs. Collins nearly collapsing from exhaustion after refusing to leave her son's side for the past 3 days. "I'll watch over him," Sarah had promised, practically having to pry the mother's fingers from the incubator. "You need rest. He'll be here when you return." Now, in the quiet of the night shift, Sarah felt the weight of that promise. She adjusted Ethan's monitoring leads and made notes on his chart, the steady rhythm of the ventilator providing a somber backdrop to her work. "No changes?" Dr. Rivera asked, his voice low as he entered the NICU, chart in hand. Sarah shook her head, lips pressed into a thin line. "Nothing. Not even a fluctuation in brain activity." The doctor sighed, rubbing his eyes beneath his glasses. "I've seen miracles in my 20 years here, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "The parents are coming back at 9, Sarah said, looking at Ethan's tiny form. "They're talking about bringing in a priest." Dr. Rivera nodded solemnly. "I'll be there for the conversation. Try to get some coffee before then, Sarah. It's going to be a long morning." After he left, Sarah continued her rounds, checking on the other 3 infants in the NICU. All stable, all showing improvement, all likely to go home to happy families within days or weeks. The contrast to Ethan's situation made her chest ache. 15 years as a NICU nurse had not made these moments any easier. The storm outside intensified, rain now lashing against the windows as lightning split the sky. The hospital's generators hummed to life as the power flickered momentarily, the backup systems seamlessly taking over without missing a beat. Sarah glanced up at the ceiling lights, then back at the monitors. Everything functioning normally. She was updating another patient's chart when she heard it. A scratching sound at the NICU's main door. At first, she thought it might be one of the residents coming to check on a patient, but the sound was too low, too insistent to be human hands. Setting down her pen, Sarah moved toward the door, the scratching growing more urgent with each step she took. The security cameras should have caught whoever, or whatever, was on the other side, but curiosity overcame caution as she approached the door's small window. Lightning flashed, illuminating the hallway beyond, and for a split second, Sarah caught a glimpse of what waited there. A dog. Not just any dog. A massive beast with thick gray and white fur, its shoulders nearly reaching the door handle. In the brief flash of light, Sarah saw intelligent eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her step back involuntarily. The scratching resumed, more determined now. "What the hell?" she whispered, reaching for the phone at the nurse's station. Security would need to remove the animal. How had it even gotten into the hospital? The NICU was on the 4th floor, access restricted by key cards and security protocols. A dog couldn't be here. Before she could dial, the lights flickered again, plunging the NICU into momentary darkness. When they stabilized, Sarah looked back at the door's window. The dog was gone. Her heart pounding, Sarah set down the phone and moved cautiously toward the door. Through the window, the hallway stretched empty in both directions. No sign of the animal. Had she imagined it? 3 consecutive night shifts could do strange things to the mind, and the storm's shadows played tricks on tired eyes. She was about to return to her station when the alarms on Ethan's monitors erupted into urgent, high-pitched wails. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she spun around, her body moving on instinct, rushing to the incubator where red lights flashed in warning. "No, no, no," she gasped, fingers flying over the controls, eyes darting between the monitors. Ethan's oxygen levels were plummeting, his heart rate erratic. She slammed her palm against the emergency button on the wall, calling for immediate assistance. And then she saw it. There, beside Ethan's incubator, its massive paws somehow silent on the linoleum floor, stood the dog. Up close, it was even larger than she'd thought. Its fur a mix of silver and white, its eyes a piercing, unnatural blue that seemed to glow in the dim light. It wasn't threatening, wasn't growling or baring teeth. It simply stood there, watching her with a calm intelligence that seemed impossible for an animal. "How did you?" Sarah began, but her words caught in her throat as the dog moved closer to the incubator, its nose nearly touching the clear plastic. "Get away from him!" she shouted, lunging forward, all professional protocol forgotten in the face of this impossible intrusion. She had to protect her patient, had to get this animal away from the critically ill infant. But as she moved, something extraordinary happened. The alarms silenced themselves, the monitors stabilizing without explanation. Sarah froze, her eyes darting between the screens and the dog. Ethan's oxygen levels were rising, his heart rate steadying. More impossibly, the brain activity monitor showed a sudden spike, the first sign of meaningful neural function since his birth. The dog looked at her, those piercing blue eyes somehow knowing, and then turned back to Ethan. It lowered its head, its breath fogging the plastic of the incubator in a perfect circle. Sarah's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Animals weren't allowed in the NICU, the risk of infection, contamination, injury. She needed to call security, needed to protect her patient, but her body refused to move as she watched the impossible unfold before her. The dog's breath continued to fog the incubator, the clouds spreading and thickening until it obscured her view of Ethan entirely. Panic finally broke through her paralysis. "Stop!" she cried, rushing forward, hands outstretched to pull the animal away. But as her fingers brushed the dog's fur, softer than she expected, and warm, unnaturally warm, the fog inside the incubator began to glow. Not the harsh blue-white of the hospital lights, but a soft golden radiance that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a heartbeat. The dog didn't acknowledge her touch, its focus entirely on the infant hidden within the glowing mist. The sound of running footsteps echoed from the hallway, the response team answering her emergency call. In seconds they would burst through the doors, and whatever was happening here would be interrupted. Sarah knew she should step back, should alert them to the animal's presence, should follow every protocol drilled into her during 15 years of nursing. Instead, she found herself standing protectively beside the dog, one hand buried in its thick fur, her eyes fixed on the golden glow that now pulsed visibly within the incubator. "Wait!" she whispered as the footsteps grew louder. "Please wait." The door flew open, Dr. Rivera at the front of the response team, his face tight with urgency. "Sarah? What's happening?" The monitors at the station showed. He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening as he took in the scene before him. Sarah standing beside a massive dog, both of them bathed in the golden light emanating from baby Ethan's incubator. "What is that? How did a dog get in here?" His voice rose in alarm. "Get it out. Now." 2 security guards moved forward, but Sarah raised her hand, stopping them with the authority in her voice. "No, don't touch him. Something's happening." Dr. Rivera stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "That's an animal in my NICU. The contamination risk alone." His words died away as the golden light pulsed brighter, then gradually began to fade. As it receded, The fog inside the incubator thinned, revealing baby Ethan once more. The dog stepped back, its mission apparently complete, and sat beside Sarah, those strange blue eyes now fixed on the doctor. In the sudden silence, a new sound filled the room, one that made every medical professional there freeze in disbelief. A cry, weak but unmistakable. Baby Ethan Collins was crying. Dr. Rivera rushed to the incubator, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he checked vitals, examined monitors, assessed the infant with rapid, precise movements. His expression shifted from professional concern to open astonishment. "This is impossible," he whispered, looking up at Sarah with wide eyes. "He's breathing on his own. His reflexes are responding. His brain activity." He gestured to the monitor, which now showed waves of normal neural function where flat lines had persisted for days. The team gathered around the incubator, murmuring in stunned disbelief as Ethan continued to cry, the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard in this room of so much heartbreak. Sarah felt the dog shift beside her, and when she looked down, it was already moving toward the door, its purpose apparently fulfilled. Without thinking, she followed it, leaving the medical team clustered around the miracle they couldn't explain. In the hallway, the dog paused, looking back at her with those impossible blue eyes. "What are you?" Sarah whispered, the question feeling both ridiculous and absolutely necessary. The dog held her gaze for a long moment, then continued down the corridor, its movements silent despite its size. Sarah followed, drawn by something she couldn't name, couldn't understand. They passed through hallways that should have been monitored, by security stations that should have stopped them. Yet no one appeared, no alarms sounded. When they reached the ground floor, the dog led her to a service exit. The storm had passed, leaving the night air cool and clean, stars visible between scattered clouds. The dog stepped out into the hospital garden, then turned to face her one final time. A gust of wind stirred the trees, and in that moment of distraction, the animal was gone. Sarah stood in the doorway, eyes searching the garden, but found no trace of the massive creature that had somehow changed everything. Had she imagined it? Was it possible that stress and exhaustion had created an elaborate hallucination? But no, Dr. Rivera had seen it too. The entire response team had witnessed the impossible animal that had somehow healed a dying infant with nothing but its presence and breath. Sarah made her way back to the NICU, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers. When she arrived, the scene had transformed. Ethan was out of his incubator, cradled in Dr. Rivera's arms as additional specialists performed evaluations. The ventilator stood disconnected, unnecessary now that the infant breathed on his own. "I can't explain it," Dr. Rivera said when he saw her, his voice hushed with wonder. "In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like this. It's as if he was never sick. The brain damage, the lung failure, it's all gone." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "And the dog?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for answers she didn't have. "Where did it go? What was it?" "I don't know," she admitted. "It just left." Dr. Rivera looked down at the infant in his arms, now sleeping peacefully. "The cameras," he said suddenly. "The security footage will show how it got in, what it did." But when they checked the recordings later that morning, they found nothing but static during the critical minutes. No dog appeared on any hospital camera, despite the dozens of witnesses who had seen it in the NICU. By the time Ethan's parents arrived, rushing in with tear-stained faces prepared for the worst, they were met instead with a miracle they could not comprehend. Their son, healthy and whole, reaching for them with tiny fingers, his eyes focusing on their faces with recognition that should have been impossible. "How?" Mrs. Collins kept asking, cradling her son as if afraid he might vanish. "Yesterday you told us to prepare for the worst, and now?" Dr. Rivera exchanged glances with Sarah, an unspoken agreement passing between them. "Sometimes medicine can't explain everything," he said finally. "Sometimes miracles happen." That night, after her shift ended, Sarah found herself drawn to the garden where the dog had disappeared. The night was clear now, stars brilliant overhead as she sat on a bench, her mind still struggling to process what she had witnessed. A soft whine made her look up, and there, at the garden's edge, stood the dog. Not approaching, not leaving, simply watching her with those knowing blue eyes. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. The dog held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and trotted away, disappearing between the trees that bordered the hospital grounds. This time Sarah didn't follow. Some mysteries, she realized, weren't meant to be solved, only witnessed. Some miracles weren't meant to be explained, only accepted with gratitude. As the days passed, baby Ethan's recovery became the talk of the hospital. Medical journals requested case studies. Specialists from across the country requested consultations, all seeking explanations for what could not be explained. Sarah kept her silence about the dog, as did Dr. Rivera and the others who had witnessed it. In their medical reports, they documented an unexplained spontaneous recovery and left it at that. Some things, they had wordlessly agreed, belonged to the realm of mystery. But sometimes, on nights when the moon was full, Sarah would glimpse a large, silver-white shape patrolling the hospital gardens. And on those nights, without fail, a child who had been given no hope would suddenly begin to heal. The guardian, the night staff began to call it in whispered conversations. Not a ghost, not an angel, but something in between. A protector of last resort for the smallest, most vulnerable patients. A miracle worker when medicine reached its limits. Sarah never told anyone about those sightings, about the way the dog's eyes seemed to find her through windows and walls, acknowledging their shared secret. Some mysteries were meant to remain just that, mysteries. Some guardians preferred to work unseen, their miracles witnessed but never explained. And in a small house across town, baby Ethan Collins grew stronger each day, unaware that his life had been touched by something beyond understanding, unaware that his recovery had opened a door between worlds that would never fully close again, unaware that sometimes, when his mother looked in on him at night, she would glimpse a silver shadow beneath his window, standing guard against the darkness. The doctors had no explanation for what had happened that stormy night. The monitors, the tests, the medical science all confirmed the miracle without explaining it. Baby Ethan Collins had been saved by something medicine couldn't identify, couldn't replicate, couldn't understand. But Sarah Mitchell knew. And on nights when hope seemed distant, when the beeping monitors told stories of battles being lost, she would look to the windows and whisper a silent invitation to the guardian who walked between worlds. And sometimes, just sometimes, it would answer her call. 3 months after the miracle that saved baby Ethan, Dr. James Rivera sat alone in his office, surrounded by medical journals and research papers. The lamp on his desk cast a warm pool of light in the otherwise darkened room, the clock on the wall showing well past midnight. He should have gone home hours ago, but sleep had become elusive since that night in the NICU. His colleagues had begun to notice the changes in him, the obsessive documentation, the late nights poring over obscure medical texts, the way his eyes constantly drifted to the windows and doorways as if expecting something to appear. Most attributed it to stress or the beginning of burnout, a common enough affliction among physicians who had seen too much suffering. But the truth was something far different, far stranger. James couldn't forget the dog, the impossible animal that had appeared from nowhere, healed a dying child with nothing but its presence, and vanished without a trace. His rational, scientific mind had spent weeks trying to categorize the experience: hallucination, mass delusion, some undocumented medical phenomenon, but none of the explanations satisfied him. The knock at his office door startled him from his thoughts. At this hour, it could only be hospital staff. "Come in," he called, hastily organizing the scattered papers on his desk. Sarah Mitchell entered, still in her scrubs, her expression tight with an emotion James couldn't immediately identify. They hadn't spoken much since that night, their shared experience creating both a bond and an awkward distance between them. "You've seen it again," he said, not a question but a statement of certainty. Sarah nodded, closing the door behind her. "Tonight, in the West Wing. There's a 7-year-old there, leukemia, stage 4. The family was called in to say goodbye." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "They won't need to now. James felt a chill run up his spine, both excitement and fear mingling in his veins. You witnessed it? The healing? Just like with Ethan. The same golden light, the same fog, the same immediate recovery afterwards. She sank into the chair across from his desk, her exhaustion evident. The oncologist is calling it a spontaneous remission. All the cancer markers are gone, Dr. Rivera. Not reduced, gone. As if they were never there. James leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper even though they were alone. Did anyone else see the dog this time? Just the patient. The little girl. She said. Sarah hesitated, as if weighing whether to continue. She said the dog told her not to be afraid, that it was going to make the pain go away. She said it had done this many times before in many places. The dog spoke to her? James couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice, despite everything he'd already witnessed. Sarah shook her head. Not out loud. She said it spoke inside her mind. I know how that sounds. But after what we saw with Ethan, how can we dismiss anything? James finished for her. He ran a hand through his graying hair, the implications overwhelming. If what the girl says is true, if this entity has been doing this elsewhere, then there should be records, Sarah said. Other cases of miraculous recoveries, other sightings. James gestured to the papers scattered across his desk. I've been looking. There are cases, dozens of them, across the country. Patients given no hope who suddenly recovered. Most are attributed to misdiagnosis or spontaneous remission, but the patterns are there if you know what to look for. He pulled a map from beneath the stack of papers, unfolding it to reveal the United States covered with small red pins. Each marker represents a case I've identified. Notice anything? Sarah leaned forward, studying the pattern. The pins formed a clear trail across the country, moving steadily westward over time. The most recent were clustered around Minnesota, with the last pin placed directly on Minneapolis, their hospital. It's been traveling, she whispered, following a path. Or being drawn somewhere, James agreed. The earliest cases I found were in Maine about 7 years ago. A children's hospice reported 3 terminal patients making full recoveries in the span of a week. Staff reported seeing a large stray dog on the grounds, but no one connected the events. Sarah traced the path with her finger. What's it looking for? Why these hospitals, these patients? James shook his head. I don't know, but I think. He hesitated, aware of how irrational he was about to sound. I think it's been drawn to you. Sarah looked up sharply. Me? Why would you say that? Both incidents happened during your shifts. Both times, the dog made direct contact with you. And according to hospital records, you've worked at 3 other facilities on this map, all during periods when unexplained recoveries occurred. The color drained from Sarah's face as she sank back into her chair. That's not possible, she whispered. But her eyes told a different story, recognition, not denial. Have you seen it before? James asked gently. Before Ethan? Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. I thought I was imagining things. Little glimpses over the years. A shadow passing by a window. Paw prints in the snow outside hospitals where I've worked. Once, in Chicago, I thought I saw it watching me from across the street as I left my shift. But never like with Ethan. Never so clearly. James leaned forward, his voice urgent but kind. Sarah, what if it's been following you? What if you're somehow connected to whatever this is? I'm just a nurse, she protested. But the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Are you? James asked quietly. Have you ever experienced anything else? Unusual? Patients recovering unexpectedly under your care? Strange coincidences? Sarah opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again, memories flooding back. The patients who had beaten impossible odds while under her care. The way she sometimes knew exactly what was wrong before tests confirmed it. The dreams she'd had throughout her life. Dreams of a great silver wolf leading her through dark forests toward distant lights. My grandmother used to tell stories, she said finally, her voice barely audible. Old country tales about spirit animals. guardians who walked between worlds. She said our family had been touched by such a guardian generations ago, that the gift of healing ran in our blood because of it. She gave a short, embarrassed laugh. I always thought they were just bedtime stories. James was silent for a long moment, processing her words. I think, he said carefully, that we need to learn more about your family history. Before Sarah could respond, her pager buzzed urgently. She glanced down at it, then looked up at James with wide eyes. NICU. Emergency. They moved as one, racing through the darkened hospital corridors, taking stairs instead of waiting for elevators. As they approached the NICU, they could hear the commotion. Raised voices, the beeping of monitors, the controlled chaos of medical professionals fighting to save a life. Sarah badged them through the security doors, and they entered a scene of frantic activity. In the center of it all was an incubator surrounded by medical staff, their faces grim with concentration. Through gaps in the circle, Sarah could see a tiny infant, smaller even than Ethan had been, skin tinged blue despite the oxygen being administered. What happened? James demanded, moving immediately to take charge. Dr. Chun, the attending neonatologist, looked up, her face tight with stress. 24-week preemie, delivered 20 minutes ago. Mother had a placental abruption, massive hemorrhage. We lost her on the table. She gestured to the infant. He's not responding to intervention. Lungs too undeveloped, brain bleeds likely. We're losing him. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. The mother gone, the child following. The terrible, profound unfairness of it tore at her heart as she moved to assist, hands working on automatic as they tried procedure after procedure, medication after medication. Nothing worked. The infant's vitals continued to decline, his tiny body simply too fragile for the harsh realities of the world he'd been thrust into too soon. We need to call it, Dr. Chan said finally, her voice heavy with defeat. Time of death. Wait, Sarah interrupted, a strange certainty suddenly filling her. She looked toward the NICU doors, knowing, somehow knowing, what she would see there. The dog stood watching through the window, those piercing blue eyes focused intently on the scene inside. Unlike before, it made no move to enter, instead remaining motionless in the hallway, waiting for her. Without a word of explanation, Sarah moved away from the incubator, ignoring the confused questions of her colleagues. She walked to the door, held her badge to the scanner, and stepped into the hallway. The dog regarded her silently, then turned and began walking away. Unlike before, she felt no confusion, no fear, only a strange sense of purpose, of rightness, as she followed. Behind her, she heard the NICU door open again, knew without looking that James had followed her. The dog led them down corridors, through doors that should have been locked but opened at their approach, deeper into the hospital than either of them had ever ventured. They descended stairs Sarah had never noticed before, the lighting growing dimmer with each level they passed. Sarah, James whispered behind her, his voice tight with tension. Where are we going? What's happening? I don't know, she admitted, never taking her eyes off the silver-white figure ahead of them. But I know we need to follow. The dog stopped finally before an unmarked door at the end of a narrow corridor. The walls here were old stone, not the modern materials of the hospital above. The air felt different, older, charged with something Sarah couldn't name but recognized deep in her bones. The dog looked at her expectantly. Understanding what was required, Sarah reached for the ancient iron handle and pulled. The door opened silently, revealing a circular room lit by a soft golden light that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested a small wooden box, carved with symbols neither of them recognized. The dog walked to the pedestal and sat beside it, those unnerving blue eyes fixed on Sarah. It wants you to open it, James whispered, hanging back in the doorway as if afraid to enter this impossible space beneath the hospital. Sarah moved forward, drawn by something she couldn't explain. When her fingers touched the box, a jolt of energy passed through her. Not painful but intense, like plunging into icy water. The lid opened of its own accord, revealing a simple pendant on a leather cord. A silver wolf's head, its eyes set with blue stones that caught the light with unnatural brilliance. "It belonged to your grandmother," a voice said, and Sarah spun around, expecting to find someone else in the room. But there was only James in the doorway, his expression as shocked as hers must be. The voice had come from the dog, though its mouth hadn't moved. The words formed directly in her mind, clear and distinct. "And her grandmother before her, and hers before that," the voice continued. "Many generations back, to when your family first made the pact with my kind. The pendant was lost when your grandmother came to this country. I have been searching for her bloodline ever since, for one who could bear it again." Sarah's legs felt weak, and she sank to her knees before the pedestal. "What are you?" she whispered. "I am Guardian," the dog replied simply. "I walk between worlds to fulfill the ancient bargain. Your ancestor saved one of my kind when we were hunted nearly to extinction. In gratitude, we bound ourselves to your bloodline, to protect and heal when called upon." "The children," James said from the doorway, finding his voice at last. "You heal children." The dog, the Guardian, turned its gaze to him. "The innocent, the vulnerable, those with lives not yet fully lived. That was the promise. But the power grows weaker with each generation that passes without the pendant's bearer. Soon, I would have been unable to help at all." Sarah looked down at the pendant gleaming in the box. "And if I take this, what happens then?" "You renew the pact," the Guardian answered. "You become the conduit through which healing flows. Together, we can save those beyond the reach of your medicine." "Like the baby upstairs," Sarah whispered, understanding blooming. "The one we're losing." "Yes, but you must choose freely. The burden is not light. To walk between worlds is to belong fully to neither." Sarah looked back at James, seeing the conflict on his face. The scientist struggling with the impossible, the doctor desperate to save lives by any means. "Will I see my family again? My life?" she asked, turning back to the Guardian. "You will live as you always have, but changed. You will see what others cannot, know what others do not. You will be called when needed, and you must answer." The blue eyes seemed to soften. "But you will never walk alone again." Sarah reached for the pendant, her decision made before she even realized it. As her fingers closed around the silver wolf, warmth flooded through her body. A golden light similar to what she had seen in the NICU, with Ethan's spreading from her heart to her fingertips. "It is done," the Guardian said, rising to its feet. "Now, there is a child who needs us." Together they ascended through the hospital, James following in stunned silence. The pendant hung warm against Sarah's chest, hidden beneath her scrubs but pulsing with energy she could feel with every heartbeat. When they reached the NICU, they found the team still working desperately on the tiny infant, though hope had clearly faded from their efforts. Dr. Chun looked up as they entered, her expression shifting from professional concern to confusion at the sight of Sarah walking directly toward the incubator. A strange confidence in her movements. "Mitchell, where did you go? We've been trying to." Her words died away as Sarah reached the incubator and placed her hand on the clear plastic. The pendant beneath Sarah's scrubs began to glow, the light visible even through the fabric. A gasp went through the room as the same golden fog they had seen with Ethan began to form around the infant, spreading until it obscured him completely from view. The Guardian sat beside Sarah, invisible to everyone except her and James, its presence a solid warmth against her leg. She felt knowledge flowing into her mind, how to direct the energy, how to focus her intention, how to reach across the boundary between life and death to bring the child back from the edge. When the fog cleared, the room fell into shocked silence. The ventilator still pumped, the monitors still beeped, but the readings had changed dramatically. Color had returned to the infant's skin, his vital signs strengthening with each passing second. Dr. Chun reached for her stethoscope, pressing it to the baby's chest with trembling hands. "This is impossible," she whispered, looking up at Sarah with wide, questioning eyes. "His lungs, they're functioning. The O2 levels are rising. What did you do?" Sarah felt the Guardian press against her leg, heard its voice in her mind. "Tell them nothing. Some mysteries must remain mysteries. I don't know, she said aloud, the lie feeling strange on her tongue. I just had a feeling we shouldn't give up yet. The medical team moved in, checking vitals, adjusting equipment. Their faces a mixture of disbelief and cautious joy as the infant continued to improve before their eyes. Only James stood apart, his gaze moving between Sarah and the space beside her where he knew the guardian sat, invisible to all others. Later, when the commotion had died down and the infant had been stabilized, miraculous recovery noted in the charts without explanation, Sarah found herself alone in the hospital chapel. The pendant hung visible now around her neck, the silver wolf catching the light from the stained glass windows. The guardian padded silently into the room, visible to her eyes, though she knew no one else would see it if they entered. You saved him, she said softly. We saved him, the guardian corrected. The first of many, if you are willing. Sarah touched the pendant, feeling its warmth respond to her fingertips. The burden you mentioned. What is it, really? The guardian's blue eyes held hers. Knowledge. You will know which children can be saved and which cannot. You will feel their pain as your own. You will be drawn to them across great distances. And you will carry the weight of those we cannot reach in time. And in return, you will never question your purpose. You will never wonder if your life had meaning. And when your time comes to cross the final boundary, you will not walk that path alone. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding settling into her bones. This was why she had become a nurse, why she had always been drawn to the most vulnerable patients, why she had never been able to accept the limitations of medical science. Her entire life had been leading to this moment, this choice. I accept, she said simply. The guardian's tail swished once in acknowledgement. Then we have work to do. There are children waiting. As they left the chapel together, Sarah glanced back once at her reflection in the stained glass. For just a moment, she thought she saw her eyes flash blue, the same impossible blue as the guardian's, before returning to their normal brown. James was waiting for them in the corridor, his face still bearing the stunned expression it had carried since the basement room. Where will you go? He asked quietly. Wherever we're needed, Sarah answered, the pendant warm against her skin. But we'll return. There are always children who need guardians. Always battles that seem lost until they're not. James nodded, understanding more than she had voiced. I'll cover for you. Create the paperwork, make the excuses. No one would believe the truth anyway. Thank you, she said, touching his arm briefly. For believing. For not thinking I've lost my mind. I'm a doctor, he replied with the ghost of a smile. I believe in results. Whatever this is, however impossible it seems, I've seen what it can do. He hesitated, then added, just come back sometimes. Let me know you're okay. Sarah smiled, a new certainty filling her. I will. As they walked down the corridor together, the guardian padding silently beside her, Sarah felt the weight of the pendant against her skin. Not a burden, but a purpose. Behind them, in the NICU, a child who should have died breathed easily, his future restored. Ahead of them lay countless others waiting for the same miracle. The pendant glowed softly beneath her scrubs, a beacon only she could feel, guiding her toward the next child who needed saving. And for the first time in her life, Sarah Mitchell knew exactly where she belonged. Walking between worlds, with a guardian at her side. The Montana winter had settled early over the small town of Pine Ridge, snow piling in drifts against the community hospital's walls, wind howling through the trees that gave the town its name. Dr. Elena Rodriguez pulled her coat tighter as she made her final rounds of the pediatric ward, her breath fogging in the chilly corridor despite the building's heating system working overtime. 6 months into her rural residency, and she was still adjusting to the isolation, the limited resources, the way weather could cut the hospital off from the outside world for days at a time. Tonight was such a night. Roads closed, helicopter transports grounded. The staff who had made it in before the storm hit, preparing for a long shift. Elena paused outside room 212, steeling herself before entering. Inside, 8-year-old Andy Blackfoot lay motionless, his small form dwarfed by the hospital bed. Machines monitored his declining vital signs, a ventilator breathing for him since the accident 3 days ago. His grandfather sat beside the bed, the old man's weathered hands gently holding the boy's, his lips moving in what Elena recognized as traditional Blackfoot prayers. "Mr. Blackfoot," she said softly, announcing her presence. "How are you holding up?" The old man looked up, his dark eyes reflecting both ancient wisdom and fresh grief. "The spirit wants to leave," he said simply. "I am asking it to stay, but it grows tired of fighting." Elena checked the monitors, her heart heavy. The prognosis hadn't changed. Severe brain trauma from the car accident, swelling that medications couldn't control, systems failing one by one. If they'd been able to transport Andy to a specialized pediatric trauma center in the first hours after the accident, perhaps. But the storm had made that impossible. "We're doing everything we can," she said, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. Mr. Blackfoot nodded, his expression gentle despite his pain. "You walk in the world of medicine, Dr. Rodriguez. I respect that path. But there are older ways, deeper healings." He looked toward the window, where snow pelted against the glass. "I have called for help of another kind. If the roads were open, the medicine man would come." Elena nodded respectfully, though her medical training rebelled against the idea. She had seen enough in her short time here to know that dismissing traditional beliefs only created barriers between doctor and patient. "I hope he can make it when the storm passes. It may be too late by then," the old man said, looking back at his grandson. "But help comes in many forms. The spirits find their own paths." Something about his certainty sent a shiver down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She completed her examination, made notes in Andy's chart, and with a final sympathetic touch to Mr. Blackfoot's shoulder, left the room. At the nurse's station, Nurse Jenkins looked up from her computer, her face tight with worry. "Any change?" Elena shook her head. "The medications aren't helping with the swelling. If we can't get him transferred by morning." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what the outcome would likely be. "His grandfather seems very calm," Nurse Jenkins observed. "Most family members would be falling apart." "He believes help is coming," Elena replied, unsure why she felt compelled to share this. "Some kind of traditional healer." Nurse Jenkins's expression softened. "The Blackfoot have strong medicine. My grandmother used to tell stories." She trailed off, perhaps remembering she was speaking to a doctor trained in Western medicine. "What kind of stories?" Elena asked, surprising herself with her interest. The older nurse hesitated, then spoke in a lower voice. "About guardian spirits that walk between worlds. Healers who come when called, especially for children." She gave a self-conscious laugh. "Just old tales." Elena smiled politely, making a note to check Andy's medications again before the end of her shift. "I'd better finish rounds. Call me if there's any change." The rest of the ward was quiet. Just 2 other children, both stable and sleeping peacefully. Elena completed her documentation in the small doctor's office, the storm growing louder outside as night deepened. The clock read 11:42 p.m., 6 more hours until the end of her shift. Assuming the relief staff could make it through the snow by then. She must have dozed off in the chair, because the next thing she knew, Nurse Jenkins was shaking her shoulder urgently. "Dr. Rodriguez, wake up." Elena startled awake, immediately alert. "What is it?" "Andy, there's someone in his room," the nurse said, her face pale. "A woman I've never seen before. She just walked past the station like she belonged here. When I tried to follow her, the door wouldn't open." Elena was on her feet instantly, racing down the corridor with the nurse close behind. Through the window in Andy's door, she could see Mr. Blackfoot still seated beside the bed. But he was no longer alone. A woman stood on the other side of the bed, her back to the door, a hand resting on Andy's forehead. She wore what looked like hospital scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "Who is that? How did she get in?" Elena demanded, reaching for the door handle. It turned, but the door remained firmly shut, as if held from the inside. "I don't know," Nurse Jenkins replied, her voice trembling slightly. But look at the monitors. Elena glanced at the display visible through the window. Andy's vitals, which had been steadily declining for days, were stabilizing. Brain activity that had been minimal was now showing patterns consistent with normal sleep rather than coma. "That's impossible," she whispered, pulling harder on the door. "We need to get in there." She was about to call security when she noticed something else in the room. A large animal sitting calmly beside the woman, its silver-white fur gleaming under the hospital lights. A dog, massive in size, with eyes that seemed to glow blue even from this distance. "Do you see that?" she asked Nurse Jenkins, her voice barely audible. The older woman pressed closer to the glass, then stepped back, her face draining of color. "The Guardian," she whispered, crossing herself instinctively. "My grandmother's stories." Inside the room, a golden light began to emanate from where the woman's hand touched Andy's forehead, spreading outward until it enveloped the boy completely. The monitors, still visible through the strange glow, showed readings that improved with each passing second. Oxygen levels rising, brain activity increasing, heart rate strengthening to normal parameters. Elena pounded on the door, medical training and rational thought warring with the impossible scene before her. "Open this door. Now!" Mr. Blackfoot turned toward the noise, his expression serene, almost joyful. He shook his head once, a gentle denial, then returned his attention to his grandson and the mysterious visitors. The golden light pulsed brighter, then began to recede, drawing back into the woman's hand and disappearing entirely. As it faded, Elena could see Andy clearly again, and her medical mind struggled to process what she was witnessing. The boy's color had returned, his chest now rising and falling in natural rhythm without the ventilator's assistance. His eyes were open, confused but alert, focusing first on his grandfather, then on the woman beside him. The woman leaned down, saying something to Andy that Elena couldn't hear through the door. The boy nodded, a weak smile forming on his face. The dog, the Guardian, as Nurse Jenkins had called it, moved closer, resting its massive head briefly on the bed near Andy's hand. Then, as if sensing the commotion outside, the woman turned toward the door. For the first time, Elena saw her face, kind but somehow ancient, despite her relatively young age. Around her neck hung a silver pendant that caught the light. Their eyes met through the glass, and Elena felt a jolt of something like recognition, though she was certain she had never seen this woman before. The stranger nodded once in acknowledgement, then turned back to Andy, speaking briefly to Mr. Blackfoot, who bowed his head in what appeared to be gratitude. The door suddenly gave way under Elena's hand, swinging open so unexpectedly that she nearly fell into the room. But when she stepped inside, the woman and the dog were gone. Only Andy and his grandfather remained, the boy awake and breathing on his own, the old man's eyes shining with unshed tears. "What? Where did she go?" Elena stammered, looking around the small room, which had no other exits except the window, sealed shut and still pelted with snow and ice from the storm outside. "She came as I asked," Mr. Blackfoot said simply. "The Guardian and her companion. They have walked between worlds for generations, healing those beyond the reach of mortal medicine." Elena moved to Andy's bedside, medical training taking over as she checked vital signs, pupil response, reflexes. Everything normal. Everything impossibly, miraculously normal. "Grandfather," Andy said, his voice weak but clear. "I saw Mom. The lady said she's waiting, but not for a long time. Not until I'm old like you." His small hand reached for his grandfather's. "She said I have to stay here and learn the old ways, like you wanted to teach me." Mr. Blackfoot smiled, smoothing the boy's hair. "The Guardian always knows what is needed," he said softly, "for body and spirit alike." Nurse Jenkins stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of awe and professional concern. "Should I call Dr. Watts?" she asked, referring to the senior physician who was sleeping in the on-call room. Elena hesitated, looking from the miraculously recovered boy to his grandfather, whose calm certainty had never wavered. "No," she said finally. "Not yet." Let me run some tests first. I want to understand what's happened here. But even as she spoke, Elena knew that medical tests would reveal nothing useful. Whatever had occurred in this room went beyond her training, beyond science, beyond rational explanation. Andy Blackfoot had been dying, his brain too damaged to sustain life, and now he was awake, alert, healing. You won't find answers in your tests, Doctor, Mr. Blackfoot said gently, as if reading her thoughts. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only witnessed. Some healings come not from medicine but from something older, something that walks between worlds. Elena nodded slowly, scientific curiosity warring with a deeper, more instinctive understanding that had no place in medical school, but felt undeniably true in this moment. Who was she? She asked finally. The woman with the pendant? A channel, the old man replied. One whose bloodline has carried the gift for generations. There have always been a few in each age who can call the guardian, who can direct its healing to those who need it most. He looked up at Elena, his dark eyes knowing. Just as there have always been those who witness and remember, who carry the story forward when it is needed. In the corner of the room, unseen by everyone but clearly felt by Elena, something shifted in the shadows. A presence watching, approving. The pendant the woman had worn flashed briefly in her memory. A silver wolf's head with blue eyes, ancient and somehow familiar. I'll need to document this, she said, more to herself than to Mr. Blackfoot. Write it up somehow. The old man smiled. Words are powerful medicine, Doctor. Choose them wisely. He looked down at his grandson, now drifting into natural sleep, the machines around him beeping with healthy, normal rhythms. Perhaps you might simply say that Andy found his way back from a distant place, guided by those who know the path well. Elena touched the boy's hand, feeling the strong pulse beneath her fingers, the impossibly healthy warmth of his skin. Spontaneous recovery, she murmured, the medical terminology feeling inadequate yet necessary. Unexplained but complete. Later, as she updated Andy's chart with carefully chosen words that skirted the edges of what she had witnessed, Elena found herself drawing a small symbol in the margin of her notes. A wolf's head, its eyes two small dots of blue ink. A reminder, perhaps, that medicine had its limitations, and that healing sometimes came from places beyond understanding. Outside, the storm began to ease, the first rays of dawn breaking through the clouds. New snow lay pristine across the landscape, but cutting through it, visible from the hospital windows, was a single trail of tracks. Large paw prints accompanied by human footprints, leading away from the hospital and disappearing into the forest beyond. Nurse Jenkins appeared in the doorway of the small office, her face calmer now though her eyes still held wonder. Andy's asking for breakfast, she said, the normality of the statement almost comical after the events of the night. I've called his aunt to let her know he's awake. She couldn't believe it. Elena nodded, closing the chart. I'm not sure I believe it either, she admitted. The older nurse stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. My grandmother would say that believing isn't necessary. Just witnessing is enough. She hesitated, then added, there are stories in many cultures, different names, different forms, but the same essence. Guardians who walk between worlds, bringing healing when called by those who carry the gift. And the woman? With the pendant. A vessel, Nurse Jenkins said softly, chosen to channel what others cannot. My grandmother said they appear when needed most, where medicine alone cannot reach. She smiled slightly. I always thought they were just stories to comfort children. Now I don't know what to think. Elena remembered the tracks in the snow, leading away from the hospital into the wilderness beyond. Do you think they'll come again? If they're needed, the nurse replied. That's what the stories say. They follow the thread of suffering to where it's greatest, bringing healing where none seems possible. She moved toward the door, then paused. Dr. Watts will want a rational explanation when he wakes up. He'll get one, Elena said, thinking of the careful notes she had written. Spontaneous recovery, unexplained but complete. Medical mysteries happen sometimes. But as she prepared to face questions from her colleagues, Elena knew she would carry this night with her forever. The golden light, the woman with ancient eyes, the silver guardian with its knowing gaze. And perhaps someday, when medicine had reached its limits with another patient beyond help, she might remember the old stories and look toward the shadows, wondering if help of another kind might come walking between worlds once more. James Rivera stood at the window of his Minneapolis apartment, watching snowflakes spiral lazily past the glass, the city lights creating a halo effect around each delicate crystal. 6 months had passed since Sarah had walked out of the hospital with the guardian by her side, the silver pendant gleaming at her throat. 6 months of covering her unexplained absence with vague stories of family emergencies and extended leave. The hospital administrators had been surprisingly unquestioning, as if some force had smoothed her departure, made it seem natural rather than the abrupt, inexplicable event it had been. Even her apartment remained untouched, rent somehow paid, mail collected by unseen hands. James sipped his coffee, watching the snow accumulate on the ledge outside his window. He had done as he promised, created the paperwork, made the excuses, kept the secret. But with each passing month, doubt had begun to creep in. Had he imagined it all? The dog with glowing blue eyes, the pendant in the ancient room beneath the hospital, the golden light that had healed a dying infant? The medical files told their own story. Baby Ethan Collins, thriving at his 6-month checkup, developing normally despite his catastrophic beginning. The premature infant who should have died that night, now at home with adoptive parents, showing no signs of the brain damage that had been inevitable. And others, over the months before Sarah's departure, cases that defied medical explanation, all with one common factor. Sarah Mitchell had been present during each miraculous recovery. The rational part of James's mind, the scientist, the doctor trained to demand evidence, still struggled with what he had witnessed. But the part of him that had stood in that ancient room beneath the hospital, that had seen the guardian's knowing eyes and the golden light that flowed through Sarah's hands, that part knew the truth. He was jarring himself from these thoughts, preparing to leave for his shift, when his phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. An unfamiliar number, but something compelled him to answer rather than let it go to voicemail. Dr. Rivera. Her voice was immediately recognizable, though somehow changed, deeper, more resonant, carrying an echo of something ancient beneath the familiar tones. Sarah? He gripped the phone tighter, moving back to the window as if he might spot her somewhere in the snowy city below. Where are you? Are you all right? I'm fine, she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Better than fine. But I need your help, James. He closed his eyes, relief washing through him. 6 months of wondering, of questioning his own sanity, and now here she was, back in contact as if no time had passed. Anything, he said without hesitation. What do you need? There's a child, Sarah said, her voice taking on an urgency that hadn't been there a moment before. At Memorial. 8 years old, leukemia in its final stages. The doctors have stopped treatment, sent her home to die. James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow outside. How do you know this? I just know, she replied simply. The guardian's gift. I can feel them, James, the children who need us. Their pain calls to me across any distance. He remembered her words from the ancient room, the burden she had accepted when she took the pendant. What can I do? I need access, Sarah said, to her room, without questions or interruptions. Tonight, after visiting hours. James hesitated, professional ethics warring with what he had witnessed of Sarah's healing power. Sarah, if I help you sneak into a patient's room, she'll die without us, James. The words weren't a manipulation but a simple statement of fact. Sophia Martinez, room 415. Terminal diagnosis. Parents exhausted from watching her suffer. Conventional medicine has nothing left to offer. There was a pause, then softly, Isn't this why you became a doctor? To heal? To save lives when possible? He closed his eyes, seeing the face of every patient he had lost over the years, every child for whom medicine had not been enough. Yes, he whispered. Of course I'll help. Meet me at the east entrance at midnight, Sarah instructed. I'll be waiting. The line went dead before he could ask any of the dozens of questions swarming in his mind. He stared at the phone for a long moment, then set it down with a shaking hand. What he was agreeing to violated hospital protocols, possibly even laws, unauthorized access to a patient, interfering with established care plans. If caught, his career would be over. And yet, the alternative was to do nothing while a child died, when he knew with absolute certainty that Sarah and the Guardian could save her. His shift that day passed in a blur of routine cases, his mind constantly returning to the choice before him. Just before leaving, he found a pretext to check the patient records, confirming what Sarah had told him. Sophia Martinez, 8 years old, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, no longer responsive to treatment. Notes from the hospice team, discussions about pain management, parents requesting minimal interventions. A life being gently, carefully surrendered. At 11:45 p.m., James parked his car in the far corner of the staff lot and made his way through the falling snow to the east entrance. The night was quiet, the hospital running on minimal staffing, most patients asleep. He badged through the door, making a show of checking his pockets as if he'd forgotten something in his car, giving the security guard a reason to remember why he had returned after his shift. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now, fat flakes swirling in the light of the street lamps. James waited, collar turned up against the cold, doubt beginning to creep in. Perhaps he had imagined the call, perhaps. Movement caught his eye, a figure emerging from the shadows of the parking structure, walking with quiet confidence toward him. Sarah's face was partially hidden by the hood of her coat, but he would have recognized her anywhere, even after 6 months. What he hadn't been prepared for was the change in her. She moved differently now, with a fluid grace that hadn't been there before, and when she pushed back her hood, her eyes caught the light with a hint of that same unnatural blue he remembered from the Guardian. "James," she said warmly, embracing him briefly. "Thank you for coming." "Sarah, what happened to you?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "Where have you been?" She smiled, touching the pendant that hung visible at her throat. "Everywhere. Nowhere. Walking between worlds," as the Guardian said. She looked past him to the hospital doors. "We don't have much time. Is the way clear?" James nodded, pushing aside his questions for now. "Security makes rounds every 30 minutes. We have about 20 minutes before they pass this way again." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. "The Guardian is near. It will join us inside." She followed him through the door, nodding casually to the security guard, who seemed to look right through her, as if she were just another staff member returning for a forgotten item. They took the stairs rather than the elevator, moving silently through the deserted corridors. James used his badge to access the pediatric oncology floor, holding his breath as they passed the nurse's station. Only one nurse was on duty, her attention focused on computer documentation, not noticing as they slipped past to room 415. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single night light, casting gentle shadows across the small figure in the bed. Sophia Martinez lay motionless, her face gaunt, skin pale as parchment against the dark fall of her hair. Machines monitored her failing body, for lines delivering pain medication but nothing curative. In a recliner beside the bed, her mother slept fitfully, exhaustion evident even in repose. Sarah moved to the bedside, her presence somehow filling the room without disturbing its quiet. She studied the child for a long moment, her expression softening with compassion. "So much pain for someone so young," she murmured, her hand hovering just above Sophia's forehead. The pendant at her throat began to glow faintly, a soft silver light that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. "What about her mother?" James whispered, glancing nervously at the sleeping woman. "She'll wake up." "No," Sarah said with gentle certainty. "The Guardian ensures that those who shouldn't witness remain asleep. As part of walking between worlds, we move in the spaces between awareness." As if summoned by her words, the Guardian appeared, not entering through the door but simply there, as if it had stepped through some invisible threshold from elsewhere. Its silver-white fur gleamed in the dim light, blue eyes luminous as it padded silently to Sarah's side. The pendant's glow intensified, and Sarah placed her hand gently on Sophia's forehead. "So much suffering," she whispered, closing her eyes. "So much fight in such a small body." James watched in fascinated silence as the now familiar golden light began to emanate from Sarah's fingertips, spreading like honey across Sophia's skin, seeping beneath the surface to illuminate her from within. The guardian sat beside the bed, its eyes fixed on the child, a low sound like humming vibrating from deep in its chest. The light grew stronger, pulsing in rhythm with both Sarah's and Sophia's heartbeats, which seemed to synchronize as the healing progressed. James found himself holding his breath, the miracle unfolding before him no less awe-inspiring for being witnessed a second time. Sophia's body arched slightly, a soft gasp escaping her lips though she remained unconscious. The monitors beside her bed registered the changes: heart rate strengthening, oxygen levels improving, vital signs normalizing in ways that should have been impossible given her condition. The golden light worked its way through her body, lingering longest where James knew the cancer had spread: bone marrow, lymph nodes, spleen. In those areas, the glow intensified to near blinding before gradually receding, drawing back into Sarah's hand and finally disappearing entirely. Sarah swayed slightly, steadying herself against the bed. The guardian pressed against her leg, lending support, and she drew a deep breath before opening her eyes. "It's done," she said softly, the exhaustion in her voice evident. "Her body is cleansed of the disease. The healing will continue over the next few days, but the cancer is gone." James moved forward, medical training prompting him to check Sophia's vitals himself. Her color had improved dramatically, breathing deeper and more regular, pulse strong beneath his fingertips. If he hadn't known her diagnosis, hadn't seen her condition moments before, he would have thought her a child recovering from a minor illness, not terminal cancer. "This is," he began, unable to find words adequate to what he had witnessed. "A gift," Sarah finished for him. "One that comes with responsibility." She looked down at Sophia's peaceful face, brushing a strand of hair from the child's forehead. "She'll wake in the morning with no memory of pain, no memory of the disease that nearly claimed her. The doctors will find no trace of cancer in her body, though they'll run test after test trying to understand." "And they never will," James said, understanding now why Sarah had needed to disappear after that first night in the NICU. Why she couldn't simply stay and use her gift within the hospital system. The questions would be endless, the demands overwhelming. Science would want to study her, replicate what she could do, turn miracle into methodology. Sarah nodded, turning toward the door. "We should go." The guardian senses others approaching. James followed her into the hallway, noticing how she seemed to shimmer slightly at the edges, as if not quite fully present in this world. The guardian moved ahead of them, its passage silent despite its size, leading them back toward the east exit. They had almost reached the stairs when a door opened ahead of them, and Dr. Chun emerged from a patient room, making notes on a tablet. She looked up, startled to find others in the corridor at this hour. "Dr. Rivera?" she said, surprised. "What are you doing here? Your shift ended hours ago." James froze, mind racing for a plausible explanation. But before he could speak, Sarah stepped forward, the pendant at her throat glowing softly. "Just finishing some paperwork," she said, her voice carrying an odd resonance that seemed to fill the hallway. "Everything's fine, Dr. Chun. You should get some rest yourself." Dr. Chen's expression went blank for a moment, then cleared, a smile forming on her lips. "Of course. Good night, then." She continued down the hallway in the opposite direction, seeming to forget their presence the moment she turned away. "What did you do to her?" James asked as they hurried down the stairs. "Nothing harmful," Sarah assured him. "The pendant allows for small adjustments in perception. She'll remember seeing you, but the details will be vague, unimportant." She glanced at him. "It's how we move through the world without leaving traces." They reached the east exit, the guardian somehow ahead of them despite having been behind them in the stairwell. Outside, the snow had stopped, stars visible now between clearing clouds. Sarah turned to face James fully, taking his hands in hers. "Thank you," she said simply. "Without your help, Sophia might not have survived the night." "Where will you go now?" he asked, reluctant to let her disappear again for another 6 months or more. Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting starlight with that hint of unnatural blue. "Where we're needed. There's a child in Boston, another in Phoenix. The threads of suffering are always there, calling to us." She squeezed his hands gently. "But I'll return. This hospital has become a nexus of sorts, a place where the boundaries between worlds are thinner. And you're here." The guardian moved restlessly beside her, sensing something neither of them could perceive. Sarah nodded to it, understanding without words. "We need to go," she said. "But one more thing." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object, pressing it into James's palm. A smooth stone, warm to the touch, with the same wolf symbol etched into its surface as the pendant she wore. "If you need to reach me, if there's a child beyond medicine's help, hold this and call my name. I'll hear you." Before he could respond, she leaned forward and kissed his cheek. Her lips warmed despite the cold night air. Then she turned and walked away, the guardian at her side, both of them moving into the shadows between streetlights. James watched until they disappeared, though he couldn't pinpoint the exact moment they vanished. 1 second they were there, and the next the night was empty, as if they had simply stepped sideways out of this reality into another. The stone in his palm pulsed once with warmth, then settled to a gentle glow that faded slowly. James closed his fingers around it, feeling a connection to something larger than himself, larger than medicine, larger than the rational world he had inhabited his entire life. 2 nights later, he was awakened from sleep by an urgent call from the hospital. Sofia Martinez's case had thrown the oncology department into an uproar. Every test showed the same impossible result: her cancer was gone. Not in remission, not diminished, but completely absent, as if it had never existed. The medical team was calling it unprecedented, miraculous, worthy of case studies and journal articles. Only James, holding the smooth stone that connected him to Sarah and the guardian, understood the truth. Some healings came not from medicine but from guardians who walked between worlds, guided by those rare individuals whose bloodlines carried ancient gifts. Some miracles weren't meant to be explained, only witnessed and remembered. And in the years that followed, as he rose through the ranks to become the hospital's chief of pediatrics, James Rivera became known for his uncanny ability to know when conventional medicine had reached its limits. In those cases, he would sometimes be seen holding a strange stone, his lips moving in what appeared to be a whispered name. And sometimes, in the hours between midnight and dawn, children beyond help would experience sudden, inexplicable recoveries. Hospital security cameras would show nothing but occasional static, and night nurses would report strange dreams of golden light and a silver wolf standing guard beside the children's beds. The Guardian continued its ancient work, walking between worlds with Sarah Mitchell by its side, leaving no trace but healed children and whispered stories of miracles that science could not explain. For some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only witnessed. Some guardians prefer to work unseen, their miracles acknowledged but never understood by the world they move through but never fully inhabit. And in a hospital in Minneapolis, a doctor keeps watch, a stone warm in his pocket, ready to call across the boundaries between worlds when a child's need is greatest, when medicine alone is not enough, when only a guardian's touch can bring healing to those beyond hope.